He proceeded to explain, if you get a pain in your stomach, whether it's a little one or a big one, yours is a big one. When you're done laughing, perhaps we can get on with the meeting. And if them little ones climb back on the twister again, they'll only fall off in a sec. So they might as well sit on the ground and listen. No, you have doctors for everything. Even the inside of your mind. You don't really mean that we got to be frightened all the time of nothing? Life, said Piggy expansively, is scientific. That's what it is. In a year or two, when the war's over, they'll be traveling to Mars and back. I know there isn't no beast, not with claws and all that. But I know there isn't no fear either. Piggy paused. Unless Ralph moved restlessly. Unless what? Unless we get frightened of people. A sound, half laugh, half jeer, rose among the seated boys. Piggy ducked his head and went on hastily. So let's hear from that little one who talked about a beast, and perhaps we can show him how silly he is. The little ones began to jabber among themselves. Then one stood forward. What's your name? Bill. For a little one, he was self-confident, holding out his hands, cradling the conch as Ralph did, looking round at them to collect their attention before he spoke. Last night I had a dream, a horrid dream, fighting with things. I was outside the shelter by myself, fighting with things, those twisty things in the trees. He paused, and the other little ones laughed in horrified sympathy. Then I was frightened, and I woke up. And I was outside the shelter by myself in the dark, and the twisty things had gone away. What? Sorry, my dogs are in the background, so if you hear strange sounds, yep, okay. Let's continue. The vivid horror of this, so possible and so nakedly terrifying, held them all silent. The child's voice went piping on from behind the white conch. And I was frightened and started to call out for Ralph. And then I saw something moving among the trees, something big and horrid. He paused, half frightened by the recollection, yet proud of the sensation he was creating. That was a nightmare, said Ralph. He was walking in his sleep, the assembly murmured in subdued agreement. The little one shook his head stubbornly. I was asleep when the twisty things were fighting, and when they went away I was awake. And I saw something big and horrid moving in the trees. Ralph held out his hands for the conch, and the little one sat down. You were asleep. There wasn't anyone there. How could anyone be wandering about in the forest at night? Was anyone? Did anyone go out? There was a long pause while the assembly grinned at the thought of anyone going out in the darkness. Then Simon stood up, and Ralph looked at him in astonishment. Bless you. You? What were you mucking about in the dark for? Simon grabbed the conch convulsively. I wanted to go to a place. A place I know. What place? Just a place I know. A place in the jungle. He hesitated. Jack settled the question for them with that contempt in his voice that could sound so funny and so final. He was taken short. With a feeling of humiliation on Simon's behalf, Ralph took back the conch, looking Simon sternly in the face as he did so. Well, don't do it again, understand? Not at night. There's enough silly talk about beasts without the little ones seeing you gliding about like the derisive laughter that rose had fear in it and condemnation. Simon opened his mouth to speak, but Ralph had the conch, so he backed to his seat. When the assembly was silent, Ralph turned to Piggy. Well, Piggy, there was another one. Him. The little ones pushed Percival forward, then left him by himself. He stood knee-deep in the central grass, looking at his hidden feet, trying to pretend he was in a tent. Ralph remembered another small boy who had stood like this, and he flinched away from the memory. He had pushed the thought down and out of sight. where only some positive reminder like this could bring it to the surface. There had been no further numberings of the little ones, partly because there was no means of ensuring that all of them were accounted for, and partly because Ralph knew the answer to at least one question Piggy had asked on the mountaintop. There were little boys, fair, dark, freckled, and all dirty, but their faces were all dreadfully free of major blemishes. No one had seen the mulberry-colored birthmark again. But that time Piggy had coaxed and bullied. Tacitly admitting that he remembered the unmentionable, Ralph nodded to Piggy. "Go on, ask him." Piggy knelt holding the conch. "Now then, what's your name?" So if you guys remember in the beginning, Fire on the Mountain, the chapter 2, they lost the boy with the mulberry mark on his cheek, the birthmark, and it is implied that he died in the fire, and that is what we are supposed to infer, if you remember us learning about that in class. Okay. Where were we? "Go on, ask him." Piggy knelt holding the conch. "Now then, what's your name?" The small boy twisted away into his tent. Piggy turned helplessly to Ralph, who spoke sharply. "What's your name?" Tormented by the silence and the refusal, the assembly broke into a chant. "What's your name? What's your name?" "Quiet!" Ralph peered at the child in the twilight. "Now tell us, what's your name?" "Percival Wemyss Madison, the Vicarage, Harcourt, St. Anthony. Yes, telephone, tele." As if this information was rooted far down in the springs of sorrow, the little one wept. His face puckered, the tears leapt from his eyes. His mouth opened till they could see a square black hole. At first he was a silent effigy of sorrow, but then the lamentation rose out of him, loud and sustained as the conch. "Shut up, you! Shut up!" Percival Wemyss Madison would not shut up. A spring had been tapped far beyond the reach of authority or even physical intimidation. The crying went on, breath after breath, and seemed to sustain him upright as if he were nailed to it. "Shut up! Shut up!" For now, the little ones were no longer silent. They were reminded of their personal sorrows and perhaps felt themselves to share in a sorrow that was universal. They began to cry in sympathy, 2 of them almost as loud as Percival. Maurice saved them. He cried out, "Look at me!" He pretended to fall over. He rubbed his rump and sat on the twisters so that he fell in the grass. He downed badly, but Percival and the others noticed and sniffed and laughed. Presently they were all laughing so absurdly that the big uns joined in. So we've got the little ones and the big uns, which are the big ones. So the 13-year-olds all the way down to the 5-year-olds. Jack was the first to make himself heard. He had not got the conch and thus spoke against the rules, but nobody minded. "And what about the beast?" Something strange was happening to Percival. He yawned and staggered so that Jack seized and shook him. "Where does the beast live?" Percival sagged in Jack's grip. "That's a clever beast," said Piggy, jeering. "If it can hide on this island. Jack's been everywhere. Where could a beast live?" "Beast my foot!" Percival muttered something, and the assembly laughed again. Ralph leaned forward. "What does he say?" Jack listened to Percival's answer and then let go of him. Percival, released, surrounded by the comfortable presence of humans, fell in the long grass and went to sleep. Jack cleared his throat, then reported casually, "He says the beast comes out of the sea." The last laugh died away. Ralph turned involuntarily, a black-humped figure against the lagoon. The assembly looked at him, considered the vast stretches of water, the high sea beyond, unknown indigo of infinite possibility, heard silently the sough and the whisper from the reef. Maurice spoke so loudly that they jumped. "Daddy said they haven't found all the animals in the sea yet." Argument started again. Ralph held out the glimmering conch, and Maurice took it obediently. The meeting subsided.